stepped up to an almost incredible degree. Enough energy was generated in that evening to change the direction of my life and my husband's. For this reason, I believe such experiences to be of utmost importance psychologically. I'm certain that the affair set off the emergence of my own unsuspected quote-unquote psychic abilities and acted as a trigger for the production of the Seth material. Apparently, I'd reached a point where these abilities were ready to show themselves. So they did. Because of my early training as a writer, they emerged through words, rather than, say, visions, and in an experience that wouldn't frighten me too much. I'd also like to mention here that I believe psychic ability itself is an outcropping or extension of creative abilities, inherent in each of us, and therefore normal rather than supranormal. As you'll see later, however, I do think that these abilities are attributes of another portion of our personalities with which we're relatively unfamiliar. I think, then, that normal creative abilities stepped up, tune us into other dimensions of reality. Following this episode, even my ordinary subjective experiences began to change. Very shortly afterward, I began to recall my dreams, suddenly and for no apparent reason. It was like discovering a second life. Not only that, but in the next 2 months, I had 2 vivid precognitive dreams, the first, to my knowledge, that I ever had. Our curiosity was aroused, to say the least. At a newsstand, we noticed a book on ESP. The words "Clairvoyant Dreams" popped up from the cover, and we bought it. About this time, I was also looking for a new book idea, and Rob made the suggestion that was to lead us further and further away from the way of life we'd always known. The paperback we'd just purchased was on the coffee table between us as we sat talking. "I've got outlines for 3 novels, and none of them really please me," I said. Rob picked up the book and said jokingly, "Why don't you do a do-it-yourself book on ESP?" "Hun, you're out of your mind. I don't know a thing about ESP. That's why not. Besides, that's non-fiction. I've never done anything but fiction and poetry in my life." "I know," Rob said, "but you're interested in dreams. Certainly after those 2 particular ones you had. And what do you call the experience you had last month? Besides, the books we've seen have dealt only with well-known mediums. But what about ordinary people? What if everyone has those abilities?" I stared at him. He turned quite serious. "Couldn't you work out a series of experiments and try them out? Use yourself as a guinea pig?" Put that way, Rob's idea made sense. I could investigate a subject that now intrigued me, and do a book at the same time. The very next day, I began. Within a week, I developed a group of experiments designed to discover whether or not the ordinary person could develop extrasensory abilities. I did an outline for the book and shipped it off to my publisher, but without any great hopes. Somewhat to my surprise, he answered quickly, and he was quite enthusiastic. What he wanted was 3 or 4 sample chapters. Rob and I were delighted, but somewhat appalled too, as we looked over the chapter headings I'd listed for the book. A do-it-yourself seance, telepathy, fact or fiction, how to work the Ouija board. "Well, get to it," Rob said, laughing. "You and your suggestions," I countered. But now I was really having second thoughts. We'd never been to a medium. We'd never had a telepathic experience in our lives, never even seen a Ouija board. On the other hand, I thought, what did I have to lose? It wasn't until much later that I remembered that another of Rob's suggestions had launched me into fiction in the first place. So we began. We settled on the Ouija board first, because it seemed the least complicated of our various experiments. Our landlady found a board in the attic, and we borrowed it. Actually, both of us were a little embarrassed the first few times we tried the board. My attitude was, Well, let's get this out of the way so we can really get down to the things we're interested in, like telepathy and clairvoyance. No wonder our first attempts were failures. The third time we tried it, the little pointer finally began to move beneath our fingertips. It spelled out messages supposedly coming from a Frank Withers, not the real name, who had lived in Elmira and died during the 1940s. Here are a few examples. Rob asked the questions, the pointer spelled out the answers. Can you give us the year of your death? 1942. Did you know either of us? No. Were you married? Yes. Is your wife alive or dead? Dead. What was her first name? Ursula. What was her last name? Alteri. What was your nationality? English. What was her nationality? Italian. In what year were you born? 1885. We were surprised that the board worked for us. I thought that it was a riot, two adults watching the pointer go scurrying across the board, and we didn't take it too seriously. For one thing, of course, neither of us particularly believed in life after death, certainly not conscious life, capable of communicating. Later on, we did learn that a man with the communicator's name was known to have lived in Elmira and died in the 1940s. That took me back a bit. But we were much more interested in finding out what made the pointer move than in the messages it gave. The next time we tried, a few days later, Frank Withers said that he had been a soldier in Turkey during one life, and insisted, through the board, that he had known Rob and me in a city called Triev, in Denmark, in still another life. Dates and locations were given, though it was made clear that Triev no longer exists. Then, on December 8, 1963, we sat at the board again, wondering whether or not it would work. It was a comfortable evening, warm in the room. Snow fell past the windows. Then, suddenly, the pointer began to move so quickly that we could hardly keep up with it. Rob asked the questions, and we paused while he wrote out the answers the pointer spelled. Frank Withers had given simple 1- or 2-word responses in previous sessions. Now the answers became longer, and their character seemed to change. The atmosphere of the room was somehow different. "Do you have a message for us?" Rob asked. "Consciousness is like a flower with many petals," replied the pointer. From the first few messages, Frank Withers had insisted upon the validity of reincarnation. So Rob said, "What do you think of your various reincarnations?" "They are what I am, but I will be more. Pun. The whole is the sum of its hearts." This was the first time the pointer spelled complete sentences. I laughed. "Is all of this Jane's subconscious talking?" Rob asked. "Subconscious is a corridor. What difference does it make which door you travel through?" "Maybe it's your subconscious," I said to Rob, but he was already asking another question. "Frank Withers, can we refer back to you on any specific question in the future?" "Yes. I prefer not to be called Frank Withers. That personality was rather colorless." Rob and I shrugged at each other. This was really wild, and the pointer was speeding faster and faster. Rob waited a moment, then asked, "What would you prefer to be called?" "To God, all names are His name," the pointer spelled. Now Withers was getting religious. I rolled my eyes and pretended to stare out the window. "But we still need some kind of name to use in talking to you," Rob said. "You may call me whatever you choose. I call myself Seth. It fits the me of me, the personality more clearly approximating